Mohan and Lila had grown old together in a small quiet town where everyone knew their names and their habits. Their days followed a gentle rhythm shaped by years of routine and shared understanding. Every morning Mohan woke before sunrise to make tea, while Lila sat near the window watching the streets slowly come alive. They did not own much, but their life felt full in ways money never measured. Their house was modest and worn by time, yet every corner held a memory. The wooden table carried marks from countless meals, and the walls held faded photographs from younger days. They spoke little about dreams now, not because they lacked them, but because life had already given them enough to feel thankful. Peace mattered more than ambition at their age. One afternoon, when the sky was pale and the air unusually still, a stranger's knock echoed through the house. By the time Lila reached the door, no one stood there. Only a single envelope rested on the ground, plain and unmarked. She picked it up slowly, feeling a strange weight that had nothing to do with paper. Mohan examined the envelope carefully before opening it. Inside lay an old property deed, yellowed at the edges and smelling faintly of dust and time. The paper looked official, stamped and signed, yet it made no sense. It listed ownership of a mountain house far from their town, a place neither of them had ever visited or even heard of. What made Mohan's hands tremble was the name written clearly on the deed. It was his full name, spelled correctly, without mistake. Lila felt a tightness in her chest as she read it again, hoping to find an error. There was none. The address led to a remote mountain region, isolated and distant from everything familiar. At the bottom of the deed, a short handwritten note waited quietly. It said the house belonged to the one who followed the paper to its end. It promised answers behind a locked door. No signature followed, no explanation, and no date. The words felt deliberate, chosen with care and patience. That evening, the deed lay between them on the table as the sun faded behind the rooftops. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Mohan searched his memory, moving through decades of life, wondering if he had ever crossed paths with someone capable of such a mystery. Lila watched his face, sensing a distant recognition even before he spoke. Mohan finally remembered a man from his early working years, someone quiet and reserved who rarely spoke about himself. They had shared only a few conversations, mostly during hard days when kindness mattered more than words. Mohan had once helped him without asking questions, without expecting anything in return. Lila listened closely as Mohan spoke of those distant days. The memory felt small and ordinary, yet something about the deed suggested it had grown into something far larger. Lila believed that kindness often traveled in ways unseen, returning long after it was given. Still, this felt different, heavier, more deliberate. They tried to ignore the deed for days, telling themselves it was a mistake or a strange trick. But the paper seemed to pull at them, quietly refusing to be forgotten. Each time Lila cleaned the table, her eyes returned to it. Each night, Mohan dreamed of mountains and locked doors. The town around them remained unchanged, unaware of the storm forming in their quiet lives. Neighbors greeted them as usual, unaware that a single piece of paper had shaken their sense of certainty. Mohan and Lila smiled politely, keeping their thoughts to themselves. As the days passed, doubt slowly turned into curiosity. Curiosity became responsibility. They both felt that ignoring the deed would leave something unfinished, like a sentence never completed. At their age, unanswered questions carried more weight than fear. One morning, without fully planning it, they began to prepare for a journey. Lila packed clothes suitable for cold air, while Mohan checked their old car carefully. They told no one where they were going, not out of secrecy, but because they did not yet understand it themselves. The road ahead was long, but something inside them felt calm. Whatever waited at the end of the deed, they would face it together. They had faced far worse with less certainty. As they locked their house and stepped onto the road, the envelope rested safely in Lila's bag, quiet and patient, guiding them toward a truth neither of them could yet imagine. The journey into the mountains began before sunrise, when the town was still quiet and the streets were empty. Mohan drove slowly, careful with the old car, while Lila sat beside him holding the bag that carried the deed. Neither of them spoke much, but their silence was not empty. It was filled with thoughts, questions, and a steady sense of purpose. As the road stretched forward, familiar buildings faded into open land. Small shops gave way to fields, and fields slowly turned into hills. The air grew cooler, and the sky shifted from soft orange to pale blue. Lila watched the changing view and felt as if they were leaving one life behind and stepping toward another without knowing its shape. The road narrowed as they climbed higher. Tall trees lined both sides, their branches forming long shadows across the path. Mohan kept his focus steady, but his mind drifted back to the past. He wondered how a simple act from long ago could lead them here. He had never believed his actions carried such weight. They stopped once at a small roadside place where an old man sold tea. The man asked where they were headed. Mohan gave a vague answer, pointing toward the mountains. The man nodded slowly and warned them that few people traveled further up. Lila felt a brief moment of doubt, but it passed quickly. As they continued, the road became rougher, and the car struggled at times. Lila noticed how quiet everything had become. There were no passing vehicles, no distant voices, only the sound of the engine and the wind moving through trees. The deed felt heavier in her bag, as if aware of how close they were getting. Hours passed, and fatigue began to settle in. Mohan's hands tightened on the wheel, but he did not slow down. Every turn in the road felt like a choice already made. Lila looked at him and felt proud of his quiet strength. Age had not taken away his sense of responsibility. Late in the afternoon, they reached a rusted metal gate standing alone at the edge of a hidden path. The address on the deed matched the markings near the gate exactly. The gate looked untouched for years, its surface rough and faded. Beyond it, a narrow road led deeper into the forest. Mohan parked the car and stepped out slowly. The air was colder here, sharper, carrying the scent of earth and old wood. Lila followed him, her heart beating faster as she looked around. The forest felt still, almost watchful, as if it had been waiting for them. They pushed the gate open with effort, and it moved with a long, echoing sound. The path beyond was uneven, but it was clear enough to follow. They drove carefully, aware that turning back would not be easy. The deed no longer felt like a mystery. It felt like a guide. After several minutes, the trees opened slightly, revealing a stone house standing alone on a raised patch of land. It was larger than they expected, solid and strong, built to last. The walls were dark with age, but the structure stood firm, untouched by decay. Lila felt a strange mix of fear and calm as she looked at the house. It did not feel abandoned. It felt sealed away. The windows were covered, and heavy locks rested on every visible door. Mohan stepped closer, examining the place carefully. Something about it felt intentional. They walked slowly around the house, taking in every detail. Behind it stood a small storage building and an old generator unit, both closed tight. There were no signs of damage or neglect. Everything looked preserved, waiting rather than forgotten. When they returned to the front door, Mohan noticed the large iron lock hanging from it. Lila reached into her bag and pulled out the small key that had been attached to the deed. Her hands shook slightly as she passed it to him. Neither of them spoke. Mohan placed the key into the lock and turned it gently. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the lock moved with a deep sound that echoed through the quiet air. The door opened just enough to let cold air escape from inside. They stood still, listening. There were no sounds from within, no movement, no sign of life. Mohan felt a calm settle over him. Whatever waited inside was not meant to harm them. It was meant to be found. They stepped inside carefully. The hallway was wide and clean, lit only by faint light from small openings above. Covered furniture lined the walls, protected by thick cloth. Boxes were stacked neatly, labeled and sealed with care. Lila noticed how organized everything was. This was not a place left in a hurry. It was prepared with patience. Mohan felt a quiet respect for the unseen person who had built this place. Whoever they were, they trusted time and honesty more than people. They moved slowly from room to room, taking everything in. The house felt calm, almost peaceful, despite its isolation. Lila felt her fear ease slightly. The walls did not hide danger. They held secrets. At the center of the main room stood a wooden table, clean and bare except for a single envelope placed carefully in the middle. Mohan and Lila exchanged a glance. They both knew this moment mattered. Whatever answers they were searching for were closer than ever. Mohan reached for the envelope but stopped himself. He took a deep breath and looked at Lila. She nodded gently, reminding him that they were not alone in this. Together, they had followed the deed this far. Together, they would face whatever truth waited inside. The house remained silent as Mohan finally picked up the envelope. The weight of it was light, but its meaning felt heavy. Outside, the forest stood still, as if holding its breath, waiting for the next step in a journey that had begun long before either of them realized it. The envelope felt smooth and carefully chosen, not rushed or ordinary. Mohan held it for a moment longer, as if the paper itself carried a memory. Lila stood beside him, her eyes fixed on the table, her mind racing with questions she did not speak. The house remained silent, steady, almost respectful of the moment. Mohan opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a letter written in clean, steady handwriting. The ink had faded slightly, but the words were clear and deliberate. The letter was addressed to him by name, written with a familiarity that made his chest tighten. Lila leaned closer as he began to read. The letter started by speaking of the past, of years long gone, when life had been uncertain and choices mattered deeply. It described a young man struggling to survive, carrying plans too large for his situation. That man had crossed paths with Mohan during a difficult season, when trust was rare and kindness even rarer. Mohan remembered him clearly now. A quiet man who spoke little and listened much. Someone who worked late, kept to himself, and carried worry in his eyes. Mohan had helped him once, offering support without questions, without expectations, simply because it felt right at the time. The letter explained that this small act had changed the man's path. Encouraged by simple trust, he had continued forward, building something that eventually grew beyond imagination. Wealth followed, then influence, but the memory of kindness never faded. The man had searched for Mohan for years, quietly observing from afar. He chose not to approach directly, knowing that sudden attention could bring unwanted trouble. Instead, he prepared this place carefully. The mountain house was built as a secure holding space, protected from greed, noise, and chaos. It was meant to outlast time and temptation. Lila listened closely, her heart heavy with emotion. The letter spoke of trust as something rare and fragile. The man believed that money revealed true character more than it created it. He did not want his life's work to fall into careless hands. He wanted it guarded by someone who understood humility. The letter ended by stating that Mohan was the only person chosen to hold the truth. The deed was not a gift, but a responsibility. The house and everything within it now belonged to Mohan and Lila, legally and fully, should they choose to accept it. Mohan lowered the letter slowly, his hands trembling. He felt overwhelmed, not by the idea of wealth, but by the weight of trust placed upon him. Lila sat down gently, kneading the table for support. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. After a while, Lila reached for the letter and read it herself. She felt tears rise, not from shock, but from the depth of thought behind the gesture. This was not chance. It was intention shaped over many years. As they looked around the room again, the house felt different. The walls no longer seemed empty. They felt alive with purpose. Mohan noticed a faint outline along one wall, almost invisible unless you looked carefully. He traced it with his hand and felt a slight shift beneath the surface. Following instructions mentioned in the letter, he pressed gently at a specific point. A section of the wall slid open smoothly, revealing a hidden room beyond. The air inside was cool and dry, carefully controlled. Lila gasped softly as the light revealed what lay within. The room was filled with secure cases, metal shelves, and sealed cabinets arranged with precision. Each item was labeled clearly. Documents rested in protective covers. Digital storage units were placed carefully, each numbered and organized. This was not chaos or secrecy born of fear. It was order built with care. Mohan stepped inside slowly, almost afraid to disturb the balance. The letter had mentioned the value of everything stored here, but seeing it made the number real. $265 million, spread across accounts, assets, and holdings, protected quietly in this hidden space. Lila felt her legs weaken and leaned against the doorway. The number felt unreal, too large to hold in the mind. She thought of their small home, their simple meals, their quiet evenings. The contrast felt overwhelming. Mohan closed his eyes briefly, steadying himself. He did not feel excitement or joy. He felt responsibility. This wealth was not earned by him, but it was entrusted to him. That distinction mattered deeply. The letter included clear instructions for verification, legal steps, and careful transfer. Everything was transparent and lawful. The man had planned every detail, ensuring that no confusion or conflict would follow. He had trusted the system as much as he trusted Mohan. They spent hours reading documents, understanding the structure of what had been left behind. Lila noticed that much of the wealth was already allocated for long-term use, with guidance suggesting thoughtful decisions rather than quick action. The man had believed in patience. As evening approached, the light inside the house shifted gently. The forest outside remained quiet, as if untouched by the magnitude of what had been uncovered. Mohan and Lila sat together in the main room, the letter resting between them once more. Lila spoke first, her voice calm but firm. She said that money could change their lives, but it could also change who they were. Mohan nodded. He knew she was right. The letter had not demanded anything, but it had asked for wisdom. They both understood that accepting the wealth meant choosing a different path. Not one filled with noise or attention, but one filled with careful decisions. The man had not chosen them because they were ambitious. He had chosen them because they were steady. That night, they stayed in the mountain house. Sleep came slowly, filled with thoughts and quiet reflection. The house did not feel heavy or threatening. It felt like a promise waiting to be honored. As Mohan lay awake, he realized that the greatest gift was not the money itself. It was the belief that a simple life, lived with honesty, could matter far beyond its quiet surface. The deed had led them here, but the true journey was only beginning. Morning arrived gently in the mountain house, carried in by soft light filtering through the trees. Mohan woke first, listening to the deep quiet around him. The silence was not empty. It felt calm and steady, like the house itself was watching over them. For a moment, he forgot everything they had discovered, but the weight returned as soon as he sat up. Lila was already awake, sitting near the window with a cup of tea in her hands. She had found supplies stored neatly in the kitchen, prepared long ago for this very moment. Neither of them spoke right away. They shared a look that carried understanding, concern, and trust built over decades. They spent the morning walking around the house again, this time with clearer eyes. The rooms no longer felt mysterious. They felt purposeful. Every shelf, every cabinet, every locked space had been designed with patience. Mohan realized that the man who built this place had thought deeply about time, knowing he might never see the result of his planning. After breakfast, they sat together at the wooden table where everything had begun. The letter lay open between them, its words now familiar. Lila spoke softly about their life back home, the neighbors, the routines, the comfort of being unseen. She wondered aloud if wealth would pull them away from all of that. Mohan listened carefully. He knew that money had the power to change direction, but not values. He reminded Lila that they had lived long enough to know who they were. This gift did not define them unless they allowed it to. They still held the right to choose how to live. They decided not to rush. Instead of returning home immediately, they stayed another day in the mountain house, thinking through every possibility. They reviewed the documents again, making notes, understanding timelines, and planning steps that followed the rules laid out so carefully. Lila suggested they involve professionals they trusted, not strangers drawn by numbers. Mohan agreed. They would move slowly, quietly, without drawing attention. The man who left this behind had valued discretion, and they would honor that. By evening, they reached a shared understanding. They would accept the responsibility, not as owners chasing comfort, but as guardians protecting intention. They would not abandon their simple home or their quiet town. Instead, they would let their life grow wider, not louder. The next morning, they locked the hidden room carefully and secured the house exactly as instructed. Mohan placed the deed back into Lila's bag, where it belonged. The house returned to its quiet watchfulness as they prepared to leave. The drive back felt different. The road was the same, the trees unchanged, but Mohan and Lila carried something new inside them. Not excitement, not fear, but clarity. They spoke more now, sharing ideas about helping others without creating dependence, about improving lives without drawing attention. When they reached their town, nothing looked different. The streets were the same. Neighbors greeted them with familiar smiles. Their small house welcomed them back without question. That comfort reassured Lila more than anything else. Days turned into weeks as they followed the plan step by step. Legal confirmations were completed carefully. Accounts were transferred quietly. Nothing sudden happened. Nothing dramatic. The process respected time, just as the original plan had. With guidance, they set aside funds for causes they believed in. Education support for children who lacked opportunity. Medical care for elders who had no family. Community projects that strengthened rather than replaced local effort. They avoided public recognition, choosing impact over praise. Mohan continued his daily routines. He still made tea every morning. Lila still watched the street from the window. To anyone looking from outside, nothing had changed. But their conversations were deeper now, shaped by responsibility and purpose. They repaired their old house gently, fixing what time had worn down, not to impress, but to preserve. They helped neighbors quietly, paying fees, settling problems, offering support without names attached. Gratitude returned to them in smiles rather than words. Sometimes, late at night, Mohan thought about the man who had trusted him. He wondered if the man had found peace knowing his life's work would be handled with care. Mohan hoped so. He felt connected to him in a way that went beyond memory. Lila found joy in knowing that their simple life had not been a small one. Kindness given without expectation had grown far beyond what they could have imagined. It reminded her that value was not measured by scale, but by intention. Years later, the mountain house remained untouched, guarded by silence and trees. It stood as a reminder of trust and patience. Mohan and Lila visited it rarely, never out of need, only to ensure it remained safe. They grew older together, just as they always had. Their steps slowed, their voices softened, but their purpose stayed clear. They had been given a rare chance, and they had chosen carefully. In the end, the true treasure was not the money hidden behind locked walls. It was the proof that a quiet life lived with honesty could shape the world in unseen ways. The deed had led them to a house, but their choice had led them to meaning.